dressed in black and ready to fight. This is what the world sees of the Antifa.
Oh, Nazis get
There is no national Antifa group. It is mostly made up of people who are far left of center, who make it their mission to battle fascists, racists, and alt-right extremists. Behind the masks are people from all walks of life, artists, moms, ordinary Americans, as well as anarchists. But fighting is only part of what the Antifa does.
So everybody had a good day at school today?
These Antifa members battle white supremacists using cameras and computers, outing neo-Nazis on social media in a process called doxing.
Yo, Tubbs, fat boy!
Jessica and Alex capture white supremacist rallies on video, then post identities of the participants online, outing them to their friends and co-workers. What is doxing?
It's ascertaining an individual's identity and personal information, and then engineering social consequences for that person for being out in the streets as a white supremacist and making threats against minority communities. You do not get to be a Nazi on the weekend. If you're a Nazi on Saturday and you're marching with a torch, you're a Nazi all week long.
So you already know who he is. What's the point of taking this video?
His friends.
His friends.
Who have you doxed?
The most obviously high-profile one was Mr. Corey Klicko.
Corey Klicko was a member of the neo-Nazi political party called the National Socialist Movement. That is, until Jessica outed him in this story she posted online.
What happened immediately afterwards was he dismantled his chapter, he stopped organizing, he canceled his events, and he publicly disavowed Nazism. He said he disavowed hate.
Klicko couldn't be reached for comment for this story. We meet a lot of Antifa who are kind of on the fringes of society. You're really not.
No.
You have a job, middle management, right?
Yes.
You have a family.
Yes.
How do you go from being suburban mom to Nazi hunter?
I have a skill. I think I can leverage it to do this kind of work for my community. And it's fun. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
This means Nazi go home. You got a problem with my sign?
I got a problem with you calling me a bitch.
I wonder why you got a problem with my sign.
I got a problem with you calling me a bitch, not your sign.
Doxing by both the alt-right and the Antifa is becoming more prevalent than the violence. But it's the violence that gets most of the attention.
I hung back to smoke a cigarette.
Alex has traveled by bus to a dozen protests across the country since Donald Trump's inauguration. He was at the deadly protest in Charlottesville last year and says he was not far behind Heather Heyer, the young woman who was hit by a car and killed.
I run up there and it looks like a war zone. People bleeding, screaming. They couldn't get ambulances through. It was a mess.
You say they're coming to these events looking for a fight, that they're armed and they're ready.
Yeah.
So by giving it back to them, aren't you kind of playing into exactly what they're looking for?
The only other option is allowing them to attack the community. I'm not going to stand back and do that. If people aren't going to stand up to them, then they're going to grow. The same thing happened pre-World War II. And the next thing you know, 6 million dead Jews. Is it worth it? Yeah. To prevent another Holocaust? Absolutely. Are we on our way there? Yeah. Is there a civil war coming if we don't stop it?
But do you realize just how close? This kind of relationship has never existed between a US president and a TV network. It is unprecedented. It's sort of a love story, so let me count the ways. First of all, the president loves Fox. He loves what he hears on Fox. He promotes the network and trashes its rivals, telling people when and where to tune in. A president has never endorsed a network like this before. Trump watches Fox and tweets about it and watches some more. Sometimes he hears valuable information, but other times he hears terrible misinformation. Sometimes he then spreads it in interviews on Fox. And around we go. Since becoming president, Trump has been interviewed on Fox every 20 days on average. Now, some of these are not really interviews at all. They're more like chats designed to promote his presidency. In this chat last week, Maria Bartiromo sounded like she was the president handing Trump talking points. Watch.
Well, you made a bold decision on Iran. I mean, this was incredible.
And Iran, look what's happening in Iran.
Look what's happening now, the strikes and the protests. The people want economic freedom.
Iran's a different place.
So let's take a closer look at this relationship. You can see how this back-scratching benefits both sides. Trump benefits from Fox's friendly segments and softball questions, and then Fox benefits from Trump's preferential treatment and constant promos. If you plug Trump, he might plug your book or your show, or he might attack your competitors, or he might do both.
You have been so great, and I'm very proud of you. And, you know, I'm a ratings person. You notice I always talk. Okay, has anyone seen his rating? What you are doing to your competition is incredible. Number one, and I'm very proud of you.
Ah, yes, Sean Hannity. He defends Trump, bashes the media, turns a blind eye to Trump world scandals, and gives his guests free rein to call for the jailing of Trump's opponents. And that's just on the air. When Hannity's off the air, he gossips with Trump and gives advice about who to hire. So let's just underscore how weird this is. No TV host has ever had this kind of relationship with a US president before. And to take it a step further, no network has ever propped up a president quite like this before. Sure, Obama had big fans on MSNBC, but there wasn't this kind of constant coordination. No one ever thought Keith Olbermann was Obama's shadow chief of staff, but that's how some Trump advisors describe Hannity. This is new, and it's weird, and we shouldn't get used to it. There's been almost a merger between a culture war TV station and a culture war president.
Well, Nazis hunt down Jews during World War II, but one director is adding quite the twist to the production. Hispanic actors and actresses will now play all these parts as the debate over immigration is escalating in America. And Stan Zimmerman is the director of this play. He is with me from Los Angeles. So Stan, welcome back. And
Thank you for having me back.
You tell me why you want to tell this story this way.
Well, actually, it started when I read a report from two of your CNN reporters about a Jewish woman in Los Angeles who got connected with a Latina mom and her two daughters when her husband was suddenly deported, and a priest in LA helped her, and she created a safe house for this family because they were afraid of being deported by ICE. And I immediately went to the play Diary of Anne Frank, and then that made me think, what if I had cast predominantly Latinx actors in this play? And I got very excited to start the dialogue of what that would mean for them.
I want to come back on your second point, but we have a clip of that CNN report that you did read. The reporter is Kyung La. Here is the story of this Jewish woman in LA.
Off the grid since last year, say these two girls, both citizens born in the U.S., both in high school. ICE deported their father for illegally crossing the border. Their mother overstayed a tourist visa and is also undocumented. The girls feared their mother was next.
What's happened since then, when you had to pack up and leave?
We became homeless for 5 months. We moved schools, we went somewhere else because we had to leave the city. We were sleeping from house to house, anywhere we could find.
Then they heard about an interfaith network of religious groups pledging to resist Trump's immigration policy by hiding them in safe houses, even in spare rooms of congregates' homes. The network estimates dozens are being hidden at any one time. It connected the family to this Jewish woman.
I grew up in a time when the Holocaust was not so far behind me.
She signed for the apartment, a cover for the family she's protecting.
Do you hear the echoes of history here? 100%. I think there's a strong feeling in the Jewish community we cannot let this happen. It's our responsibility. What was done to us cannot happen to other people.
After the new policy was announced this week, you retweeted this side-by-side of a story about the new NFL policy, and here it is, a story here, a headline at least, about a German football club, presumably in the 30s or 40s, that was punished for not giving the Nazi salute. Do you think that's an appropriate comparison?
I think it's dangerous to not pay attention to the warning signs. You see how back in the 1940s and the 1930s, the Nazi legal scholars, Nazi lawyers, attorneys, when they were trying to figure out how they were going to configure their new Nuremberg laws, they looked to the United States as a model for their racial laws, and that's just the truth of history. And there are distinctions that I think we need to be careful not to miss these signs. And again, I'm not saying we're Nazi Germany, but
But that's how some receive that. I mean, usually comparisons to Hitler or Nazism are usually ill-advised. But you see this one as a fair one.
Well, I don't think that. Obviously, the Nazis were atrocious, but again, you look at the history of what the Nuremberg laws, where they got their ideas from, their racial laws, where they got them from. They looked to the United States as a model. This isn't, something. This is actually documented in their history. It's documented at the Nuremberg laws, and you can see this throughout the South, where they looked at Jim Crow laws for certain laws that they wanted to bring forth in their country. So I think we'd be remiss if we don't pay attention to history, and if we don't see that, again, I'm not calling America obviously Nazi Germany, but I think we need to pay attention and not allow creeping fascism to happen in this country.
So let me get your reaction to what NFL Hall of Famer Warren Moon told TMZ this week of the policy. He said, and I'm quoting here, "This way, all the attention goes back to the anthem and takes away from the players," which it should be, because the anthem is, and it should stand alone because it's for everybody, not just for the players. He says, and I'm paraphrasing this portion, is that it's not perfect, but this is as close to perfect as the NFL is going to get.
I think these players are expressing and using their First Amendment rights, and we soon forget that dissidents are patriots. Dissent is patriotism. You look at Dorothy Day; she was a patriot. She was a huge dissenter. You look at Martin Luther King; he was a patriot. He was a huge dissenter. Daniel Ellsberg is a huge dissenter. He was also a patriot. And dissent is patriotism in this country. It's the First Amendment. It's what our country's founded on. And if we allow ourselves to start stripping people of those rights and acknowledging that they have those rights, I think we're treading down a dangerous path.
So in this particular photo, which touched me very much and many other people in the course of this last week, the mother is being searched as she set her daughter down there at a transport vehicle. The little girl is crying, and she did the entire time that she was there on the ground. They were taken to a processing center, and at that center, we know that other children and parents were separated. I never knew if this little girl and her mother would be. When they were taken away, we really had no idea about that. But at that time, it was happening with many other children and their parents.
So some families were being split up, but according to the government and the child's father, this particular mother and child were not separated. Joining me now in an exclusive interview about the backlash to the cover is Time Magazine's editor-in-chief, Edward Felsenthal. Ed, thanks for being here.
Sure.
As soon as it was revealed through an interview with the child's father, the family not been separated, there was a really strong right-wing backlash to your cover, including from the Trump administration. Did you make a mistake by having this crying girl on the cover?
Look, I think John Moore's photo was and will remain an iconic one. We chose the photo because this little girl became the face of this story on front pages and home pages and TV screens
but
and
maybe
Facebook
she
feeds.
shouldn't have been the face of this story if she wasn't separated from her mom.
Well, as John just said and has said all along, none of us in the media who used the photo knew what had happened to the girl after this precise moment. And I actually think part of the power of the image is that unknown. This was a girl who's coming to America, has just completed one terrifying journey, and whatever its contours, whatever happens to her, faces another very frightening journey as well.
But by Monday of this week, we knew that she hadn't been separated from her mom. In fact, on Tuesday, you all issued a correction to a web story about that.
I don't believe the case. We did make an error, which obviously I regret and hate making errors anytime.
Sure.
But we made an error on a web story early in the week, not part of the cover package, in which we said that the mother had been separated, and we quickly and transparently corrected that. We didn't know, nobody using this photo knew on Monday or Tuesday that they had not been separated.
Well, we knew according to the government they had not been separated, but by Monday, CNN reported according to the government they had not been separated. Now, I understand we should be skeptical of what the government's saying when it comes to this story. And to this day, we still don't know the status of a lot of these kids that have been separated. It's sickening. But I just wonder about the use of this photo and whether you all discussed whether it was the appropriate one to symbolize the family separation policy.
We discussed it, as we discuss every cover, and I felt that this photo symbolized this moment in America. She became the face of this debate, of this crisis, and juxtaposing her with the person whose decisions, in whose hands her fate was held, I thought was a powerful, important statement of the decisions we have to make as a country.
Press Secretary Sarah Sanders responded to this controversy on Friday. Here's part of what she wrote. She said, "It's shameful that Dems and the media have exploited this photo of a little girl to push their agenda. She was not separated from her mom. The separation here is from the facts." Has this done damage to Time magazine?
You know, with just speaking directly to Sarah's comment, you know, it's always hard with images of children. But this story was about children. It's hard, it's complicated, but I was struck by the comment of the father, who in a couple of his interviews late in the week said that he was proud and pleased that his daughter had become a symbol of this, of something bigger than herself. And he said he hoped that the picture had touched Trump's heart.
And to be clear, the damage done to these families is so much bigger of a story than what happened undercover. I am not trying to claim otherwise. But let's look at some of how the right-wing media has portrayed this. I mean, here's the Daily Caller saying the media's narrative about family separation at the border has been completely demolished, as the truth behind a viral photo of a crying child tells a completely different story. This was the top story on pro-Trump websites on Friday. It's still a top story in some of these sites now. I mean, they're using this one issue to try to distract from what is a disgusting situation at the border.
America's boys, and this can probably be applied to boys worldwide, but I'm confining my remarks to America in particular in relationship to the shooting epidemic that we have, are defined, as we always have been, by our masculinity. And the model of masculinity that boys and the men that they grow into seems to be broken. And it's having profound and devastating effects, not just in these spectacular violent episodes that we see, but all across the spectrum of American life. And I think we need to look more closely at what it means to be a boy and be a man in America, and how we define masculinity.
So I just want to quote from you yourself what you wrote in the New York Times. Many feel that the very qualities that used to define them, their strength, aggression, and competitiveness, are no longer wanted or needed. Many others never felt strong or aggressive or competitive to begin with. We don't know how to be, and we're terrified. I mean, it is an important conversation to be having right now, because it's true, many boys, men, don't, or say they don't quite know how to navigate the current environment, whether it's the toxicness that you talk about, or even whether it's the other major issues in the wake of the Me Too movement. Just explain from your writing, your stand-up, your experiences, what you think they're feeling.
I'll speak from personal experience and also as the experience of a father of a teenage son. Growing up, I felt and observed that there was a narrow model of what it meant to be a man in the culture. And that model embraced a lot of good qualities: strength, ambition, at times competitiveness, aggression. But it was and continues to be a very narrow model and doesn't speak to the fullness of the experience of being a man. And that fullness can and should encompass all the full spectrum of what it means to be a human being. In the piece, I talk about how feminism opened the door and changed the language for what it means to be a girl or woman in the culture. It greatly expanded how women viewed themselves. So now, when we think of, for example, a strong woman, we don't think of a masculine woman. We think of strength as being inherent in being female. At the same time, when you look at boys and men, what we don't have is commensurate language. So you don't have the phrase sensitive boy or sensitive man existing in a positive way in the full spectrum of what it means to be a man or a boy. So instead, those words, there are certain words that have a kind of feminine quality to them. And what I guess I'm looking for and asking for is a decoupling in the language from this idea of femininity associated with masculinity as a negative thing, or rather to say that we need a broader language for how we discuss masculinity so we can encompass these ideas.
What has been your biggest takeaway or lesson learned from this experience at this point?
I think my biggest takeaway from this is when somebody, no matter who somebody is, no matter how big or powerful they may seem, a bully is a bully, and it's important that you stand up to them. There have been multiple instances throughout Ingram's professional career where she's tried calling out people, for example, at Dartmouth University because of their sexual orientation, and she told LeBron James to shut up and dribble. I don't see any apology for those people. I mean, why? It's really sad. It's disturbing to know that somebody could bully so many people and just get away with it, especially to the level that she did. But I think now, with advertisers standing with us, we can accomplish anything.
The word bully stands out because some people are calling you a bully. In fact, conservative commentator Eric Erickson, I want to read you what he has said. He said, having someone apologize to you and then refusing to accept it unless conditions are met is what bullies do. What do you say to that?
I don't agree with it. Just like Laura, she can have her opinion, he can have his. It's up to them, but I don't agree with it personally.
Laura Ingraham has invited you back on her show for a, quote, productive discussion. Would you consider doing that?
I would only consider doing that and after she apologizes to all the people that she's hurt throughout her professional career because of her immaturity and unprofessionalism. It's not right, and I think she needs to apologize to those people that she's hurt.
Sadly, Ingram probably won't be the last person to attack you. Do you worry at all about this kind of back and forth becoming a distraction to your main mission and what you're trying to accomplish with gun reform?
Absolutely, because I think when people call us out like this, what they're really trying to do is distract from the bigger movement here. And that we're not trying to take anyone's guns, we're simply trying to save lives. That's all we're trying to do. And when Laura uses divisive language like many people on her show have, where she calls us the left and right and doesn't acknowledge the fact that we're just all Americans and our diversity is our strength. She needs to acknowledge the fact that everybody's opinion matters, even from my perspective, hers does too. But what matters most is that we come together as Americans, and what I think shows like hers do is divide us even more, and I think division is the last thing this country needs. We need to come together as Americans, not as Democrats or Republicans.
So I understand you're taking a gap year, decide not to go to college right now. What are you planning to do? Are you trying to harness something more in this movement and have politicians reached out to you?
Yes, some have. What I plan on doing during this gap year, which I still may not be taking, I haven't really made a final decision on, is I'm going to be working on a candidate basis because there are Republicans who are supported by the NRA and not supported by the NRA. There's Democrats that are supported by the NRA and there's Democrats that are not supported by the NRA. I'm going to be working on a candidate basis to ensure that the best people that are willing to serve their constituents and not special interests are getting into office.
Which candidates have reached out to you?
There was mainly one that's going against Steve King in Iowa that has reached out to me, and a few have reached out to me, but I think at the end of the day, what's important is that we all just really come together and work on this, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans to solve this issue and realize that our strength is in our diversity of people and our diversity of ideas, because this is not an issue that has one solution. There are multiple solutions that we must work to implement to fix this.
The reality is that Fox News has not been friendly toward the interests of or perspectives about African American people or Latinos or a whole range of other minorities. And I think that when we begin to sling around the term racism, people get offended and think, well, the right says it, the left says it. Well, bias is one thing, racism is another. Racism is the ability to impose your viewpoints, biased as they are, as normative, and then have the power to reinforce them as necessary and primarily exclusive. So I think in that sense, the institutional power that's wielded by a place like Fox News certainly has to be called into question. And the fringe, as he pointed out, of the Republican Party has to be taken to task for the racist elements that are there.
Eric Erickson, what are your thoughts?
Really? We're going to go there with a news channel that they're racist? You know, we can't have an honest conversation about race in this country because of things like this. Everyone wants to hurl the racism charge, particularly towards Republicans and towards conservatives, simply because they don't agree on policy. And we try to take policy disagreements and turn them into racial issues when they're not. I think it's time to grow up. Honestly, I can't believe a week after the Andrew Breitbart story broke, we're still talking about Shirley Sherrod instead of the economy, jobs, you name it.
Well, but here's the problem. When you say that racism is equally distributed on both sides, I have no doubt and talk about liberal, enlightened racism on the one hand and conservative racism on the other. I think that's an absolutely valid point. The problem is
do you see but Professor, are you saying there's some sort of difference in racism on the left versus racism on the right?
No, absolutely not. I'm saying that racism is racism, period. I'm saying it's deeply embedded in the structure of American society, and that people on the left and people on the right certainly have been racist and have promoted and promulgated racist ideas. But let's not pretend Mr. Erickson can't be that naive to say that it's more than policy disagreement. Policies are rooted in the culture of racism. Jim Crow was a public policy perpetuated by the legal systems of American society. So don't pretend that the mere reference to public policy
opposition and opposition to Barack Obama are not racist.
The opposition to Barack Obama as a witch doctor, tell me, sir, why the reference to his ethnic particularity has anything to do with his public policy. Be opposed to his public policy.
That's what I'm wondering.
What I'm saying is that the witch doctor motif has been perpetuated by the Tea Party, and on top of that, when we talk more specifically about Fox News,
it hasn't been perpetuated by the Tea Party, just by a few people who were crazy enough to hold up signs.
You know what?
We can't paint with that broad a brush.
I understand that, but see, that's the argument. You can't paint it with that broad of a brush, but the same people who never stood for civil rights, who never stood for the progressive realization of freedom for minority people, who never stood for the realization of the basic rights of these individuals, then all of a sudden appear on the scene, take the words that have been used by the progressives, that is, civil rights, liberty, and justice, and then use them in defense of right-wing policies that have no sensitivity toward African American people.
Of the country.
I'm talking about racial liberty, sir. I'm talking about liberty rooted in the possibility that black people can be respected. That's what I'm speaking of.
Let Eric respond.
Yeah, you know, to say that people who weren't there marching in the civil rights movement are now all of a sudden marching in the streets and that's proof of racism or something. No, it's not. It's proof of people being hacked off by the growth of government. And certainly there are some people out there on both sides. I mean, saying the Tea Party is racist is like saying all Democrats support cop killers because a few Mumia Abu Jamal people show up and have free him posters. I mean, we're painting with too broad a brush here, and we should be having a serious conversation about race, but we can't because we're too busy into stereotyping.